Oh, good. I'm not going to go up there. I'm going to come down here. We're getting late in the afternoon, and we're going to make this fun and personal. And let me throw in one quick story. I got to watch the clock here. Out in the hallway here, same question I get all the time, and it wouldn't matter if you could have the Bush girls here, the Obama girls. If you're the son or daughter of a former president, you always get this question: how often do you get to go back to the White House? And there's this misconception that once you live in the White House, they give you this like little magical key, right? That you can go there anytime you want. Well, it's not true. Our family left there in January 1977. That was when Jimmy Carter took over as president. The next time that I got to the White House was over 25 years later. 2003, President Bush was in office. President Bush invited Dad and our whole family back to celebrate my dad's 90th birthday. And it was almost to the day, 30 years later, he'd been sworn in as president. So we all go back to the White House. I haven't been there in over 25 years. They invite us up. They're going to have a big dinner. And they invite us up to the second floor of the White House. That's the family quarters. And they have a little reception for us. And I'm wandering around thinking, my gosh, I was an 18-year-old kid. I used to live here. And I'm kind of wandering around. And there's a screen door that leads out into a balcony that overlooks the south lawn of the White House. And I walked through this screen door, sort of caught in my thoughts, and I'm standing there soaking it all in. And I look to my left, and in a perfect line is Vice President Dick Cheney, former Secretary of State Colin Powell, former Secretary of Defense Don Rumsfeld, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, and then me. And it's like one of those pictures you see, and underneath it goes, "What doesn't belong here?" Yeah. So I asked Alan Greenspan to leave, and no, I wouldn't do that. I might do that. Listen, I want to share with you some of the funny little stories. Let me get my clicker here. Brought some pictures for you. I want to share with you some of the funny little stories, anecdotes about the White House. And as you can see, I brought some pictures here. And hopefully you'll realize that they're real families that live there. It doesn't matter if they're Democrats or Republicans, they're real families. My life was just like yours, okay? I admit I had better government housing, okay? I admit that. But hopefully, I got a quiz for you. I put this in last night. This picture was taken the day after Dad lost the election to Jimmy Carter, November 1976. That's my sister Susan on the left. That's me giving my mom a hug. Does anybody recognize the man in the middle? Oh, no. That's your former Vice President, Dick Cheney. He was 32 years old, youngest chief of staff. And even back then, he had that warm, friendly smile, Things don't always change. So here's Mom with the Queen of England. Yeah, well, Mom had to wear the bigger hat, okay? No, what happened to the Queen? The Queen came for the bicentennial, America's 200th birthday. And Mom and Dad had a big state dinner for her. And what happens at a state dinner, the president and the first lady go down the family elevator and they go out the diplomatic entrance. They meet the Queen and Prince Philip. They bring him in. And before the dinner, they take him up to the family quarters for a little chit-chat, 10, 15 minutes before they go down for the big dinner. So Mom greets the Queen, brings her in. She's standing at the family elevator to go upstairs. Everybody's all dressed up, black tie and tails. And what my mother doesn't realize is that my 21-year-old brother, Jack, is in the basement of the White House coming up the elevator, and he has not dressed for the state dinner yet. All he has on is a pair of Levi's and no shirt. Now, ladies, you can imagine my mom is standing at the elevator as it opens up of the Queen of England, and there's her 21-year-old son, bare-chested, and she was horrified, right? But the Queen had a wonderful sense of humor. She looks at my mother and she goes, "Oh, don't worry, Betty. I have one of those at home, too." So we're all family. We're all family. A little more background on myself. I used to cowboy and rodeo professionally. That's me on the right. I was a team roper. Wasn't any good. I was going to starve to death the way I used to rodeo. But in fact, I'll show you how bad I was. This is a picture of me getting bucked off what we call a bareback horse, okay? And now, the important thing about this slide is the guy up there with the sunglasses on, that's my Secret Service agent. And I always thought he was there to protect me, right? If my life was in great danger, he was going to leap into action. And if we go to the next picture, you'll see my life is in greater danger now. He has not moved, okay? Now, Michelle, you're laughing. That's your federal tax dollars at work right there. So be careful what you're laughing about. Usually, if I have enough time, and I don't today, usually I walk an audience through the constitutional crisis of what happened with Watergate and the pardon of Richard Nixon and the ethics of all that, or the lack of ethics, one or the other. But today, with my limited time, I want to share with you probably one of the greatest lessons that my father ever taught me. About 3 months before he passed away in 2006, I was in a federal prison in East Texas. And wait a second, that didn't sound right. I was in a prison, but I wasn't in prison, okay? I was in there doing what my parents had taught me to do. That's, you add more value to your life by reaching out and helping others. I'm a recovering alcoholic, 25 years sober, to the grace of God, and a good 12-step program. And I know a lot of you are wondering, wait a second, that's Betty Ford's son. How did he become an alcoholic? Yeah, I should have known better, right? But that's how sneaky a disease it is. My disease is out that door right now doing push-ups, waiting for me. It's tough. But part of that sobriety is giving back. I go to juvenile detention facilities, prisons, schools, whatever. Do a lot of that for charity work. But and it's funny, when I went to my mom, told her I was an alcoholic, and she was just like every other mother in the country, right? She goes, oh, no, my son can't be an alcoholic. I go, Mom, stop. Like, you can't be in denial. You're like Betty Ford, you know, and you're like the poster child for this. And everybody thinks I went to the Betty Ford Center, right? Like we have a family wing or something, you know, like I got the family discount. Yeah, no, I did it through AA outpatient. But back to the story. I'm in the prison talking to about 200 prisoners that are in a special program to make sure once they get out of prison, they are not absentee fathers, they stay off drugs, they stay off alcohol. And we're doing a sharing thing, and I tell my story, and then we do a question and answer thing afterwards. And a young man stands up. This is the second time I'd been to this prison in East Texas, and they have a good program there. And this young man stands up and he says, tell us a story about your father's success, about being vice president, about being president, and all the honors and things that go with it. And I said to this young man, I said, you know, you wouldn't know this. My dad, he's pretty ill right now. Probably 3 or 4 months, we know he's going to pass away. And I know in 3 or 4 months, I'll probably be at a state funeral. And the flags will be waving and the cannons going off and the trumpets blaring and they'll be honoring my dad. And, you know, at that moment, his greatest value in my life will not be what he did dealing with the Chinese or dealing with our allies. That's not going to be his greatest value. That's not what I'm going to remember. His greatest value to me is going to be what he did to lead our family, how he showed us how to be a great husband, how he showed us how to be a great father. And sure enough, 3 months later, my dad passed away in December of 2006. And I sat on those Capitol steps at that state funeral, and I didn't remember what he did to bring the troops home from Vietnam or cut taxes. That's not what I remembered. His greatest value was leadership of our family. Well, that same young man stood back up in that prison. He says, well, if you won't tell us that story, tell us who he is. Tell us about his character, the fabric of who he is. And I sat there and I thought, and there were a lot of stories ran through my head, and I want to share with you today the same story I shared with those 200 inmates in that prison 3 months before Dad passed away. My dad played football at the University of Michigan. Let's go back one. And this is a picture here. We retired his jersey at the University of Michigan about 25 years ago. He's only the 5th number retired, jersey number. And I haven't seen my dad cry a lot, but he cried that day, and they beat Michigan State that day. That was a great thing. And here's a picture of Dad when he played football at the University of Michigan. And President Lyndon Johnson used to say about my dad, that dang Jerry Ford played too much football without a football helmet, you know. And they were actually good friends. They respected each other. Here's a picture of Dad's team. Dad was number 48 up there, captain of the team. After the ceremony to retire his jersey, the whole family's heading up into the stands. We're headed back up to get our seats, and I'm walking, and this man pulls me aside, and he says, I want to tell you a story about your father when he played football here at the University of Michigan. He says, your dad played in 1932 and 33 on 2 championship teams. Michigan was 10-0 both seasons, undefeated, national champions. In 1934, your dad was captain of the Michigan football team, and they were supposed to play a team called Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech at that time was an all-white school. And Georgia Tech found out that Michigan had one black player on its team, number 61, Willis Ward, up in the left-hand corner. Georgia Tech said they would not take the field, they would not play the game if Willis Ward suited up for that game. Now, this isn't about Georgia Tech because all the northern teams were doing that, all the southern teams. Southern teams wouldn't come and play unless the black players on the northern teams were seated on the bench. Well, my dad, apparently, the man was telling me the story, said your dad was so incensed that his good friend Willis Ward couldn't play in that game. Willis and him were best of friends. They roomed together when the team traveled. Willis found out my dad was going to quit the University of Michigan football team to make a stand for his friend, Willis Ward. Now, Willis heard that, went to my dad and said, Jerry, you got to play. You're captain of the team. I'll sit down. I'll do what we normally do. And he convinced my dad to go back on the team. Now, remember, Michigan came off two undefeated seasons in 32 and 33, 10-0. The year this story happened, Michigan's record was 1-8. They won 1 game and they lost 8. But the only team they beat was Georgia Tech, 9-2. Now, I had never heard that story about my father's life. He didn't wear that on his sleeve, didn't tell it. I had tears running down my face. And that man looked at me that was telling me the story. He said, son, do you know what character is? I couldn't speak. I just had tears. I couldn't speak. He looks at me. He says, character is what you do when nobody's watching. And nobody was watching your father as a young 20-year-old kid at the University of Michigan willing to make a stand for his friend Willis Ward. And I walked off that field and I thought, I don't have any Willis Ward stories. But I wondered what the importance of what kind of stories are my kids or my grandkids going to be telling about me someday. The importance of you thinking about what kind of stories are your kids and grandkids going to be telling about you. It's an important question to ask. In my remaining minute or so here, I want to share with you probably the greatest thing my dad ever gave me. It's a book, handwritten. He took out a yellow legal pad just like this, picked 20 subjects that he thought were important to a young man or a young woman growing up in this world, subjects like character, what is integrity, making and keeping friends, the art of compromise. And he wrote hand essays on a yellow legal pad, put them together. Most of them are only half a page, not even a full page. Bound them in a book, gave us all a book, my 2 brothers, my sister and I. And so I encourage you to go home. He wanted to be accountable to us. Go home and do this for your kids, your grandkids. Kid down the street doesn't have a parent. And now I got to be careful because I don't want to set you up for trouble, because I remember when Dad gave me my book, I was in my early 20s, right? And he comes and says, Steve, I got this book for you. I want to be accountable. It's about character and integrity. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't get it at that time. And I remember Dad walking towards me, and I'm going, oh, boy, Dad's getting goofy again, you know. But it didn't matter, because 10 years later, when my life came crashing down because of alcoholism, this book saved my life. It was from my dad. It was written in love, and it was wisdom. And I'm going to share one with you right now, and then we'll be finished. Give you an idea of what you might write for your kids or your grandkids. This is one he wrote, and it's kind of a strange subject. This one is called Learning How to Lose. It says here, in this highly competitive society, there is always a winner and always a loser. Even the best sometimes lose because of circumstances beyond their control or because of unintended mistakes. But to walk off the playing field as a sore head or with a public display is not good for one's conscience or for one's reputation. Losing should be looked upon as a lesson so that you can do better next time. The disappointment should not bemoan the spirit, rattle one's composure, or sidetrack a well-organized plan, or preclude another effort. Learning to lose is to recognize that one setback is not the end, but in reality can be a new incentive to reach and achieve higher goals. Every son should hear that. Every daughter should hear that. Every mother should write it. Every father should write it. Thank you very much. You've been a great audience.